I love coming to these prayer meetings on Wednesday morning. What's the rest of them in?
They are really good.
It is really encouraging, and there is a special bond between men who know how to pray, and it's like they can reach out and touch the Lord, with a surety and a consistency. God's going to do what He says He's going to do, and His promises are not something He takes lightly.
And it seems like every week it's 12 or 13.
Yeah.
The number doesn't vary a great deal.
Yeah. It's wonderful. Wonderful.
You can kind of count on the guys.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah. So this is Brian with Truth Matters, and this is Conversations on the Porch. We're not on the porch today. The weather's kind of inclement for interview outside, but this is my friend Thomas Colbern, and we've known each other for a while.
Quite some time, actually.
Quite some time.
Yeah.
But 35 years ago, we were sitting in Babyland together. We didn't know each other back then. But I saw you and your family, you raising your boys, all of that.
I recall that period of time, for sure. Susan would look over at me and say, "Where's Gabe?" We just look up like that and just watch where all the fuss was happening in the circle. It's over there now. They had this whole other world underneath the pews. And the kids would come and go.
You find your kid 5 pews down.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And whoever they were with, they were taken care of. So.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one thing you can count on. Then they bring them back to you. This is yours.
Yeah. Drop them off.
So we were in Bible college together back then. This was back in the 80s. I don't know if you were in Bible college or not. I was.
I was in the 70s.
70s? Mm-hmm. You were there for a while. When did you get there?
72.
Wow. I got there in 79.
I missed the basement.
You missed the basement?
I missed the basement.
Yeah.
But I was early before the extension of the original church.
Right.
So if you were sitting up in the top balcony, you could touch Don's head.
Yeah. That was quite a while ago.
It was.
Oh, I have a lot of memories of that. And I think I left there in, must have been 88, I think. Moved to Winthrop, took my boys and moved to Winthrop after things happened. Things kind of fell apart a bit. And so where did you go after that?
We moved in the middle 80s to Belgrade, and it was the best thing in the world we could have done. The boys loved it, and it was a difficult time for everybody. But we were there for 85, 86, 87. And Jamie and I sold life insurance together. We spent 6 months on the road, crisscrossing the Badlands of western Montana. And we wrote insurance for ranchers in some of the most far out places. It was wonderful. It was one of the greatest experiences of my life. There were many times where he and I would pull over and just blow snot bubbles. We were laughing so hard. It was hilarious. We just had such a good time. And that was during the shifting of Alan McManus's pastorship. And he went through some difficult times, and I was just his sidekick. We were right-hand guys, and we were driving down the road one day, and he'd lost his church, and my boys had freshly gotten put out of the church because somebody else came along and decided they were church worthy. So Sam and Gabe both got removed, and I was told that if I said one word that I was gone too. So here Alan and I are driving down the back streets of Belgrade. He said, "How would you like to be an elder?" I said, "How would you like a church?" It was funny times, difficult times, but we all went through the same kind of a thing. If you look back, everybody's got those stories. And then I came back And in 1988, 89, that period of time, things were starting to fall apart. And Susan and I decided that we were going to reach out to the kids who had been disenfranchised from the church, and a lot of them were the result of broken families. And we had like 40 of them, 45 kids, and we met every Saturday. And Marilyn Enochs now was our partner. She had the Hillibus Wetlands Park in Federal Way, and that was our headquarters. And then during that same period of time, so we had the kids at the old church, and we had them at the Hillibus, and we camped, and we took them water skiing and snow skiing and camping, and just did all kinds of things. Baptized 19 of them, and that went until 94, 88 to 94, 6 years we had those kids. And then Susan and I just looked at each other on, over a period of time, we were saying, we need to make a break. We got to go find out who we are outside of this influence. Not God, but community chapel. Who are we? Who are we as a married couple? Who are we as a family? And so we went to New Mexico. And
It's quite a change.
I had lived in Taos, New Mexico the summer of '69 and was familiar with it, loved it. We had a commune up at the hot springs, and it was really well run, and we had a big garden and lots of food, and sometimes we'd feed 150 people, new faces a night. We were kind of like the cross section between New York and San Francisco. Yeah. They stopped at our commune, and I loved New Mexico. And when the idea of us going back to New Mexico, it made all the sense in the world. So we went and stayed with friends for a few weeks until we found our own place, and lo and behold, I am a quarter of a mile from the hot springs in Rancho Steakhouse, New Mexico, so I'd come full circle. 1994 to 1969, we'd come full circle, and there we were. And we spent the next 13 years in New Mexico.
Oh, is that right?
It was the highlight of my adult life. I loved it. I had a successful insurance business. We did a lot of financial planning for people. I had Colorado and New Mexico as my region for a couple of insurance companies. So we crisscrossed both of those states and ate green chili stew at every little cantina I could find. I fell in love with green chili and went on to make it commercially.
This is your own recipe?
My own recipe. In fact, we made it just recently for Jamie's birthday.
Oh, really?
And we had it over here. We fed, there was supposed to be 26 people, but we made more, and more came anyway. But it was, we made green chili stew, Thomas's Taos green chili, and Susan's Rio Red. So we actually had 3 recipes. Yeah. The Rio Red, people would ask, well, what is that? Where'd you get the name? And I said, well, it's Rio Red, man. So, and then we had El Paso prison chili. That was the 3rd recipe, and that was more of a Tex-Mex. And we got that because I did some research in Silver City, where I found the best bowl of green chili in all of my travels. Really? And I did some research and found that my grandmother had grown up in Silver City. And so the Galton's family and the Kennewick family were both extensions of my family. Mm-hmm. And one of them was the marshal for Silver City, and the other one was the head of the El Paso prison. And so whatever the one from Silver City chasing desperados into the Badlands in Mexico, then he'd come back through El Paso because he knew that he would have a cot to sleep on and a good bowl of green, not red chili.
Oh, the red
El
chili.
Paso prison chili.
Ah.
And that was where the third recipe came from. I made 690 gallons of green chili up here in the Northwest. And I guess, was part of my entrepreneurial skills, as they say. So, Steve Fletcher ate on that green chili frozen in his garage for a year and a half. So he was very grateful for my lack of commercial success because it ended up in his place. But at any rate, New Mexico, I was on the board of directors of Taos Historic Museums. And in absent of a director, the secretary is responsible for all of the collections, all of the properties, all of the endowments, everything. So I was in charge of, and talk about a historical lesson. I mean, I got to know so much about the Native Americans, the Pueblo Indians of the area, the constant conflict between them and the Hispanic population, and then you introduce the Anglo population.
Right.
It's fast. I loved it, absolutely loved it. Susan, there was a period during our stay there where Susan was required to come back up here to Seattle and take care of grandchildren. And what had happened was that my son had twins and his wife was less than matronly. She just didn't want to be a mother, didn't want to be a family. And so they made arrangements and he got custody of the kids, but he needed help raising the kids. Right. So Susan came up to the Northwest in 2004. It was June of 2004, and she stayed for 11 months. So I ran the business by myself, and she was up here taking care of grandchildren. And she was in a service on a Sunday, and somebody had made a statement that clicked in her heart. He said, "Jesus is closer than your breath." And that really made an impact on her. He's closer than your breath. And you get to think, well, how close is that? And she called me Sunday night. "Thomas, you got to understand this. You got to hear, he's closer than your breath." And I thought, that's a good word, huh? Yeah. I was totally receptive. And she said, "No, I don't think you're hearing it." She called me Monday morning, Monday evening, Tuesday morning. We talked twice a day. Yes. She said, "Thomas, he's closer than your breath. You get it?" I said, "Yeah, I get it." That's totally cool, huh? I'm really, absolutely. Wednesday morning, Wednesday night, Thursday morning. "Thomas, he's closer than your breath." It started making an impact. If for no other reason, because she was adamant, but no, it was starting. Sure. It was getting in. Thursday night, she said, before we hung up 11 o'clock, "He's closer than your breath." And it was like, whoa, landed in my heart. I went to bed, woke up at 7 o'clock the next morning. I had no breath.
You couldn't breathe.
Zero. Not just struggling. Zero. No breath whatsoever. And I'm standing there going, I got 45 seconds to make a decision. Which room do I go in? And when I get there, what do I do? I went to the bathroom and I thought, there's nothing in here for me. I went into my office and I called 911. And they said, "What is your emergency?" And I went, "Ugh." And they went, "Is this Thomas Colbern?" I said, "Ugh." "We can tell that you're obviously distressed. sit down, we'll be there as quickly as we can, based on where we are and where you are, it's gonna be 20 minutes. Hang up, and I go into the kitchen, and I lay on the table, and I simply said, Jesus, if you are truly closer than my breath, you have to become my breath, because I have none. Now, it wasn't just a question of having difficulty breathing or shortness of breath.
Right.
Zero. Absolutely none. And I am laying on this table for 20 minutes until I hear the beep, beep, beep.
Yeah.
The ambulance never, no siren coming
Right.
up. They backed into my drive and they came into the house and they said, what's your problem? And all I could do was just beg with my eyes because there was nothing, I could say nothing. Here's the problem. Besides the fact that I couldn't breathe, he brought a young Hispanic girl who was on her first ambulance run, and she was gorgeous. Absolutely beautiful. I could see it, and I could breathe.
Yeah.
And he was totally preoccupied with this girl. He didn't give a rip about me. Really, he couldn't care less. He said, okay, you know what, let's see. I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll do it. We'll take your blood pressure, okay? And we'll put the oxygen sat on your finger. Now, I lived at 7,200 feet in the mountains, high def. So what's considered normal in Seattle at sea level is different in 7,200 feet. So 92, 93 is considered normal. I was at 94, so he goes, you don't have a problem.
You had a normal
Oxygen level of 94. Yes. God was supernaturally providing oxygen to my brain and all of my organs, but it was not coming from my breathing. He was providing.
Wow.
And so then the driver says, well, look, let's do a EKG. And, we want to make sure that we've got all this right. So he goes through all the process of an EKG. And then he steps away from me with his back to me with this young girl showing her how to read an EKG. And I'm going, a little help here, just act like you care. And he didn't. He really didn't. In fact, he said, well, I'll tell you what, I'm taking a close look. Other than the fact that your heart rate is like 260 beats a minute,
wow.
I can't justify that, but everything else seems pretty normal. So why don't you just drive yourself and we'll follow you and see if you make it. Now, this is called a trial. I was in the midst of a trial because I had no one to turn to. I was getting no help from those people that public servants
right.
that we usually turn to for help. I was getting none of it. And I'm in trouble, literally in trouble. And he said, look, you know what? I think you're having an anxiety attack. I said, in my heart, I'm thinking, I didn't call for a diagnosis, man. I called for a ride, And he's going through all of these possibilities also that he can express to the young lady, all the things he knows. Part of me was really wanting to wring his neck. The other part of me kind of understood. She was lovely. Finally, he said, I'll tell you what, if you crawl into the ambulance under your own power, I will take you to the hospital. And I did. I crawled on my hands and knees, pulled myself into the back of the ambulance, laid down on the bed, and he stopped at every stop sign, every stoplight, and waited. There was absolutely no emergent care at all.
Wow.
And in fact, he could have turned right at the main intersection that goes up to the hospital, and he waited for the light to turn green before he made the turn. They pulled me in and wheeled me into the hospital. And the first thing they see is the 94 on my blood set. That shows the amount of oxygen that your body is receiving from somewhere. And so immediately they're not overly concerned. The 260 beats a minute, that bothered them. But they took blood and said, let's see if we've got enzymes in the blood. If he had a heart attack, what's going on with this guy? Let's get the results back. Stat, 30 minutes later, we're going on 2 hours now, where I have not taken a physical breath. Not one. And I'm sitting up, and they put a cannulus on my nose, the oxygen, which was useless because I couldn't breathe.
Couldn't breathe anyway.
No. And they finally said, get him downstairs and let's get a CAT scan. We got to see what's causing difficulty in his breathing, because clearly there's a problem.
And they know this time you're not able to take a breath.
They could tell that I was
They
not
figured it
breathing.
out.
Yes. And so they took me downstairs and put me in the CAT scan. I uttered for the first time a word because I was able to breathe out. And that word was, Anavan. I just wanted something to calm me down because I was really distressed. I was in the worst possible trial you can imagine, and nobody could understand it or care. So he gets on the phone to the doctor and says, the guy is asking for Ativan. Well, give it to him, you know? And so they gave me a shot and then inserted the dye, ran the CAT scan, took me back upstairs, and I heard for the first time somebody who cared, the head of the ER, said, my God in heaven, why is this man alive? Call the helicopter. And they brought the helicopter up from Albuquerque, put me on it, gave me another shot of Ativan, and then they gave me a shot of what they called a clot buster, which I think was concentrated heparin. Took me to the helicopter, and now these are emergency evac helicopters, right, where you lay down in the back. The nurse climbs in the back and sits down on the cot. And they make me climb up into the front seat and strap in alongside the pilot. The pilot is irritated with me because he could see that I'm agitated. And he said, look, and I am like 3 or 4 hours away from my bonus. Don't you break my helicopter. There was no help anywhere. And so that second shot of Ativan began to take effect. I lifted off, and we got to somewhere over Santa Fe, and I passed out. I don't recall landing. I don't recall being admitted into the hospital. I don't recall being dressed and undressed and changed. I recall waking up at 6 o'clock that evening. And I realized that I went from 7 in the morning until 11:30 in the morning at the hospital without taking a physical breath. And then I have no idea what happened between then and when I woke up at 6 in the evening. But when I woke up, I was hungry and I could breathe a bit. And there was these two pulmonary specialists sitting on the bed next to me, just waiting for me to wake up. And they said, we just want the privilege of consulting with the man who owns this file. I said, okay, that's me? What was it like? No, first of all, no man in the history of recorded medicine has tolerated this event, ever. What occurred with you is that you had a 4-inch blood clot break off from your thigh and work its way up through your vena cava, and then your heart kicked it into and lodged in the saddle of the right and left pulmonary arteries. And there it sat, clogged. Nothing passed that clog. Your heart was beating and you couldn't breathe, and your heart was not able to move any blood anywhere in your body. It wasn't able to get any oxygen into your body. Nothing occurred for hours. What was it like? That was the question. What was it like? I said, all right, duct tape your mouth shut, pinch your nose, and lean on a jackhammer. Every time I tried to take a breath in, the diaphragm kicked it out.
Yes.
For hours and hours. And I was so alone. It was the most claustrophobic, lonely experience you could imagine. And they said, we just got to know. We just can't imagine what it was like. And I said, well, that's it. Just try what I just told you.
How many hours did it say you before you took your breath?
7.
7 hours.
7 hours without taking a physical breath. And they said, this is so meaningful to us as scientists and doctors. First of all, we don't use the M word, but this was a miracle. There is no other explanation.
Yes.
And secondly, we would like to do a complete workup at our own expense so that we can build a file for educational purposes. So whenever there's a pulmonary conference anywhere in the country, my file is somewhere on the top. This is the one that you all need to really hear about, you know. The point was, though, that if Susan had not drilled into my spirit that he is closer than my breath, day after day after day, I don't know what would have happened. But it finally dropped in, the realization, the revelation that Jesus is closer than our breath, the creator of our breath. And she had drilled it to the point that it finally had slipped in, and when I woke up that morning, the revelation was there. And all I could do, as claustrophobic and lonely as it was, I never let go of the reality that he was closer. That whatever I was going through, he was closer. Well, how close is that? I mean, how do you get any closer than that? Yeah, he becomes everything,
right.
All in all. That night, midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, and I'm laying kind of awake. And there's a scripture in Song of Solomon that says, though I sleep, my heart waketh.
Right.
And it's referring to that period of time between sleep and waking where you're kind of in a vulnerable place and he can speak to your heart.
Right.
That was where I was. And it was not an audible voice, but it was a clear message. He was saying, I've got a lot of good men, really good men. And some of them actually claim my name. And for that, I am so grateful. But I'm looking for that group of men who are willing to walk in the level of faith that realizes that I am closer than their very breath. Is that you? He had me, you know. He had my full attention
Yes.
all day. And he just said, is that you? And this is August 29th, 2004. And between that date and today, have we lived out these promises perfectly? No. But the impact that it had on my life, that he cares so much that he's willing to allow me to go through such a deep, vulnerable trial, realizing that I could have died. Had I chosen to, I had the opportunity to keel over at any moment. It was available because I wasn't getting anything. But as long as I trusted in the reality of what Susan had drilled into me, he was there.
That's so amazing.
Yeah.
Isn't it though that when we go through these things, God has already prepared us somewhat for what's up ahead?
He has put in our spirits the revelation of who he is and what he's capable of doing if we will only allow it. Same kind of thing with the trials that you go through. We're all at that same place where if we will get out of the way and let him. That's all I could do.
That reality is something we learned the hard way, obviously. Pretty pig-headed.
Yeah, sure, no question.
But the thing that, with my son and all of that, what I had to learn through the process, first of all, that me and the generation that I've created, my children,
Your legacy, yeah.
we are intricately connected. And it's like, you know, the sins of the father go down to the children, or the blessings of the father go down to the children, whatever that is, whatever your legacy is, you know. And so they go through, I go through, and that's the way it should be. I guess you're so in love and such connected to your children, and you're willing to go to the ends of the earth for them, and what they go through, you go through. But it's even deeper than that.
And to the degree that we are willing to neglect them, they will receive that same part of the.
Absolutely.
And I made reference to the fact that I had lost my son, you know, and that we considered that a win. I look back over the 50-some years of his life, and I was thinking, what are my regrets? And I realized that I had none. I had taught him the truth. I had drilled the grace of God into his life. I had promised that Jesus is real and that if you will only call out to him, he will be available.
Right.
And no matter how difficult life became for him, I had his back. I told him we'll go through it thick and thin, whatever it is, man.
Yeah.
I'm with you.
Yeah.
That's the way God is. We become little gods to our kids.
Absolutely.
And we become representatives of the real God to our children.
Yeah. We don't realize that position that we hold, you know, like the Father has this relationship with us, we have with our children, and that we are acting out those things, those attributes of God to our children. And we have to toe the line. We have to carry that with us, you know, so that they be raised up into men and women of God also. You know, if we don't follow through with what God has put in us and serve ourselves rather than our families, you know, I know men in the church who neglect their wives because they're still of the mind that they're independent.
Yeah.
Right? And so they become an island unto themselves, and they have a wife, and I know men who treat their wives like doormats. And their wives are obedient and submissive to their husbands and love their husbands. Still through that. But what a loss for the husband.
Without question.
Yeah.
The neglect is a heavy price.
It is.
It's very expensive. Have we got another couple minutes?
Yes.
This is what happened over the course of my life, that the words, "He's closer than your breath," were so important to Susan, that she was of a heart that they were able to just immediately get in. Because I heard them over and over and over again. She heard it once. but it meant so much. So what occurred over the course of our years before and together, that it was that important to her. And I look back at what we consider our salvation experience. And she and I were living together in, we've got prisons coming.
Yeah.
We were living together in a little poacher's cabin in the town of Ardenbois, above Antioch,
Right,
on the
Wenatchee
Columbia
area.
River
Yeah.
area. Exactly, just down from Wenatchee. And we didn't have a car. And we would, in order to get into town, we would hitchhike. And she was very pregnant, so we had no trouble getting rides. And we went down to Wenatchee on this Saturday morning. I had to renew my driver's license, and we had to get some groceries or pick up food stamps, whatever you did when you were a hippie back in the late 60s, early 70s. And we went about our business. I got my driver's license, we got some groceries, and then we're crossing the highway in Wenatchee that is like a 4-lane highway, and there was a stoplight there.
Mm-hmm.
And so we got the permission to cross, so we go ahead and cross, and then we stick our thumb out and we get picked up by a fellow who said, "Hey, I'm sorry, I'm not taking you very far. I'm just stopping at a swimming hole, but is that okay?" I said, "Yeah, we'll go wherever you go, And so he took us to where he was going, and we got out and stuck our thumb out. And the next ride was a car full of kids that were going up to Okanagan to a Christian revival service.
Really?
And they were from Bethesda Christian Temple in Wenatchee. Well, immediately, I mean, here they are, the same age as we are. I'm excited, fellowship, And they said, "Well, look, rather than us taking you home, why don't you just come up with us and watch what we do?" I said, "I'm all for it, man." I've been lonesome for a long time. We've been living up in this poacher's cabin. I had gotten sick, and Susan was nursing me back to health from the hippie flu. And we were up there for a couple, 3 months, and I was just lonesome. I was ready to visit with anybody. They said, "Well, come on up with us and watch what we do." Well, they played the loveliest kind of semi-folky, rocky Christian music, and then each one would testify after each song. And I'm watching them, and I'm thinking, this is special. This isn't just some little routine. These guys are something. I didn't know the word anointed at that point in my life, but I could clearly see that they were, at some point, they were good at what they were doing. And they had a great influence on me, and they had an influence. There was, 150, 200 kids from the high schools in the area listening to them sing songs and testify about the love of Jesus. And I saw 80, 90 kids go forward, kneel down, and give their hearts to Jesus that night. And I thought, that's a big deal. And I wasn't saved yet. I knew God. In fact, when Susan and I moved to we lived at 8,800 feet on the eastern slope of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains of New Mexico when we first came together. And we were growing pot. We had 40 acres of pot, and we were silly kids. We could have done 25 to life. We were idiots. Yep. And, when she and I first got there, I gave her this little Bible. It was one of those ivory-faced Bibles that my grandparents had given me in 1955. I was like 7 years old. And it was a keepsake that I had kept. So I wrote to her he loves us, and I love you. And I gave it to her as a gift. And she was like, ugh. And she read that thing all summer long. So she was like being dealt with, you know. And so here we are back up into the Northwest, and we're at this revival meeting, and I'm impacted, and she's impacted, but she is so pregnant, she's not sure what's going on in her life. Gabriel is doing one of these things, you know. And they said, look, rather than us taking you back up to your place tonight, help us pack up. We'll take you, spend the night at our place, and then you can come to church with us in the morning. Why not? You know, I'm all for that. And so we helped them pack up, and we got down there. I spent the night at their place, and then we went to church service. It was Mother's Day, so it was a standard Mother's Day service. And then they said, look, rather than us taking you home, why don't you come to the picnic in between services? Get some barbecue, you know, and get together, meet some of the people. I said, why not? Absolutely. I love barbecue. And so Susan and I ate barbecue, and, you know, day was wearing on, and they said, look, it's getting late. Rather than us taking you home right now, why don't you come to service tonight? And then we'll take you home after service. And I said, I'm okay with that. No problem. This has been just fine. In the service that evening, the pastor calls for an altar call. And he says, there's a young couple in our midst this evening, and I am asking them to, particularly them, to come up and kneel down here so that I can pray for them. Well, I knew, I was so quickened. I knew it was me.
Yeah.
Susan had been battling Gabriel, deciding that he's going to go down head first. She's 8.5 months pregnant, and he's doing this kind of a thing. You could see the battle going on under her shirts, you know. And I said, come on, Susan, he's talking about us. And she said, who is? She hadn't heard a word, you know. I said, just come with me. And I'm almost at a dead run. I mean, I'm down the aisle and headed down the main. She said, where are you going? I said, just come on. He's calling us. So we went in, and she came, met up, we knelt down at the front of the church. And he said, before I pray for you to receive the Holy Spirit, I want to tell you that yesterday morning at 10 o'clock, you crossed the highway in front of my car at the stoplight. And I prayed that God would do everything necessary to get you to this place tonight. And I thought, okay, how many different, we got 3 different rides, and we got these guys that are constantly keeping us in the area. They didn't know why. Yeah. They just were being friendly. And we kept acquiescing and agreeing. And it was because God had moved on that man the morning before. And I thought, Jesus, if you're willing to go to that length to get my attention, I have absolutely no right to ignore you ever again. And we both got born again, spirit-filled, and we had aching cheeks for days. We were smiling.
I remember that
so
day.
hard. But see, this is how God moves and cares for his people. Everybody's got a story similar.
Yep.
God did whatever was necessary to get you to this point so that he could have relationship. That's what it was all
That's
about.
why I tell people in my testimony, God will do anything to go behind your back without your permission, do all sorts of things and manipulations. And all of a sudden you are before the Lord.
Yes.
And he's made it happen.
Yes.
And he humbled you and broke you or whatever the situation was. Mine was a drug overdose back then. And it brought me to the Lord, you know. But I always knew God was back there. I always knew he was existing.
Yes.
But he will use any event to turn you toward him.
And bring you close and then minister to you so that you just can't bear to leave.
Absolutely.
And all of this is over the course, well, this occurred in 1970 when we got saved at Bethesda Christian Temple. And then when God moved on me in 2004, so that's a lot of years had transpired. And God had continually moved on our lives, just continuing just to love us.
Yeah.
And to become, and really, I feel like sometimes he just wanted to be worthy of our love.
Yes.
He was willing to humble himself to the point that whatever I need to do to receive your love.
Right.
Mercy.
You couldn't ask for anything.
No, goodness sakes. Anybody that resists that is needs help. And that's what we're here for. We're here to help.
We need to help. Let me tell you about something about these interviews that I'm doing. This is something that Don Tuggle and I were working on 4 years ago.
Don is so wonderful. He was such a wonderful
Oh man. And he was going to be my first interview. Then COVID hit. And we'd been talking about a revival happening amongst the kids, and he was really into that. That God would move upon the youth and affect the world.
Yes.
And that's the vision he had, And then Don had other plans. He's with the one he loves.
Boy, I tell you what. And these are people that, regardless of what they've gone through, they seem, to me, they were just fearless.
Right. And that would be Don.
Indefatigable.
Yes.
You couldn't beat him.
Right.
Out, devil! That was Don, And God takes him home.
Yeah.
And he wouldn't have it any other way.
Absolutely. I smiled and cried at the same time. So happy for him. So happy. And he would rather be there than anywhere else.
And God begins this in a lot of us.
Yeah.
He begins this entire sequence of events at the younger years.
Yeah, years ahead of time.
And he started me when I was 10, 11 years old.
Yeah, me too.
Becoming real.
Yeah.
And honoring my heart.
Mm-hmm.
When I said, I just don't like the Presbyterian Church. Whenever he says, let us pray, I'm so excited because it means it's over.
Yeah.
And I'm out on the back lawn of the Presbyterian Church asking the Lord, I know that the Dagers are Catholic and the Hunters are Presbyterian, and I know that the Reubens are Jews. Is there any chance that I could just be a Christian? And that was a really innocent cry of just not all of that.
Yeah.
I just want to be a Christian. And he said, yeah, we can do that.
Yeah.
And everything else in between.
Because our ignorance has some real bones to it.
Him doing that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely.
It's wonderful.
The reason I'm doing these interviews, as we walk through this life, we collect a lot of people.
We do, yes.
Friends, especially when we're walking with God. And then, of course, anybody who lives is collecting people along the way. But for us who are walking with the Lord, there's people who impact us. There's people who are examples to us of God's goodness.
Yes.
And those are the people I'm drawn to, is those who, we walked with God for 40 years, 50 years. And this is a question I'm going to ask everyone of them. What has kept you this long walking with God? How come you've never, and you may have had doubts or reservations at times, which we all do, but What kept you from turning your back and walking the other way?
I will tell you honestly that I never backslid.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean that I didn't sin and I didn't do foolish things and think a whole bunch of foolish thoughts and end up running off the rails from time to time. But I never turned my back on God. And it was because he began to put the imprint on my heart at a young age.
Yes.
He said, I'm going to invest over the years in you. And I will do this at this age, and I will honor this at this age, and I will keep you from this at this age. Now, there's a lot of things that he's done for me that I don't have the luxury of knowing, because he never told me.
Right.
But he kept me from it.
Right.
Every accident, every wrong turn, every bad decision, he kept me from the liability that it represented. And I look back and think, he invested over 75 years, he has invested in me. There's nowhere to go.
Absolutely.
There's nothing better.
We were talking about this Saturday at the picnic. Will Stoll and I. Where would you go? What would you do? You know, I had the question come to my mind about a month ago. What would you do if the Spirit of God lifted off you today, right now? And the person I asked that to just went, oh. It's like their whole life would be for nothing. In effect.
I get it. It's just like the air just kind of just
right.
rushes out and you just alone.
Yeah.
However, I believe that if the Lord said, I am going to withhold my Spirit from you for a season, that he has invested enough truth in us to keep us for that period.
And it seems like he's done that at certain times where he's just kind of backed off.
You don't feel him?
No.
There were times in my life I don't feel him.
Do you trust him?
What did I do wrong? You know, he said.
It's like when the Lord came to you, are you going to trust me through this?
Absolutely.
Right. With the same with my son and the things I had to go through. I was forced to make a decision. The same decision when my wife passed away in 85. Are you going to trust me? And I had to trust him. It kept us alive. And with my wife passed away. And that's a decision I will never regret. That was the most wonderful, wonderful thing. You had mentioned one time with Gabe, after Gabe passed, that there was this bubble of mercy around you.
Oh, gosh.
I relate.
It was
to that.
So real.
Yeah.
I mean, here's my firstborn, who literally bled out in my presence, laying on his face, calling out to the Lord, repenting, while his system is just losing everything. And talk about a difficult time, but I never lost the thought of who I am to this man.
Yes.
I was his father. I felt really paternal at that moment.
Yes.
And I held him, and I took care of him, and his brother completely lost it. He said, what is going on? What do we do? Do I call 911? I said, yes, go do that. And I'm holding him, and after 2 days later, he passes. They said we did everything we could. We gave 22 units of blood and plasma. It was just too much. His body went through too much. We couldn't keep him. We tried a number of different procedures. We failed. And when he passed, Susan and I were at his bedside, and we're looking at the monitor, and he's intubated, and that's the hospital for you, just so that he can rest. Yeah, right, you can get your payment for COVID, because in reality, they put the primary cause of death was the rupture of his duodenal artery. But secondary was,
yes,
COVID pneumonia. And so they got whatever compensation was due them for that part of his death certificate. At any rate, we held him and we looked at the monitor and God took him home. And Susan looked at me and I looked at her, and for the next 2 weeks, and more so her than me, I had an experience when he was passing. She was upstairs sick, and she didn't realize that we were going through all that we were going through. She just heard the ambulance arrive, and she came downstairs and was able to take him, walk with him, and he just looked up and held her and said, "I love you, Mommy." And the whole time he called me Daddy. He was so humble. All of the air of manhood and being a tough skydiver and professional skier and, you know, always had a license to pack and all the above. It was gone.
Yep.
It was Daddy. I love you, Daddy. But Susan walked in this place of an intimate knowledge of the glory of his salvation. She knew the joy of Gabriel's salvation at that moment. God gave to her as a place to walk and stayed with her for weeks after. And the whole time she was just, "He's home. We got him home, Thomas." We did it. You know, it was like, and she just was in love with Jesus the whole time.
The reality of that.
And I was so grateful for that.
Yeah.
So, one other last thing. These are the kinds of things that we experienced. Gabriel was my firstborn, Samuel my second, Casey my third. They were all named Sarah before they were born. I wanted a little girl so bad. But I got 3 boys. And Susan's pregnant with Casey. And I'm driving down across the First Avenue Bridge, coming back from the fish house. And he says, "I have this vision." It was like not a real closed vision, but vision,
right.
Visualization. And he said, "I saw this stillborn baby, blue, in my, right before me." And he said, and this was a voice that was as clear as the day, "Can you trust me for your son's life?" I didn't know it was a boy or a girl. We didn't find out back in those days,
Yeah.
"Can you trust me for your son's life?" And I said, "Lord, you are the giver of life. Of course I can." Then do it. It was a command.
Mm-hmm.
We went through the entire gestation process, and my sister is a midwife living in the East Coast, and she wants to show off her midwifery talents. And so they coordinated the length of time and when she was going to be due, and they decided this weekend, and my sister flew out. And we went to church Friday night and Sunday morning, and Susan said, "I'm staying home Sunday night." And my sister Sandy and I went. We came back, and Susan's water had broken, and she was in the throes of birth. And my sister did this amazing thing. I mean, I'd never seen that. "All right, everybody, I'm in charge." Literally. "Thomas, you just go over there in the corner. We don't need you anymore. Susan, you just continue breathing like that.
Yeah.
I'll take care of everything." Okay.
Yeah.
And 40 minutes of absolutely violent, what's that term they use between here and there, she was doing that. And he was born quickly and laying there. the exact image I had seen 5 months prior. Exact same image. And he was blue. Cord wrapped around twice around his neck is blue. And Sandy goes, oh no. Oh no. And she unwraps the cord and she, gets his feet and his butt and mouth, and she's freaking out. Oh, Jesus, no, don't do this to me. Here, not here. No. And I'm standing in the corner. And finally, she absolutely looks up at me with these fearful eyes, like, I have let you down in the worst possible way. I said, sis, watch this. And I leaned over and put my hand on his head. I said, Jesus, breathe your life into my son. And I said, Sandy, that was for you. God wants you to know who the giver of life is. And she said, I have been set up. I said, yes, ma'am, you were. And we were all prepared for it. I never told Susan that I'd had that vision.
Absolutely.
I just kept it to me.
Yeah.
But God had prepared me for it.
Yeah.
So, he's that thorough. Every aspect of our lives, he's got covered. Yeah. I just love it, man.
It's so exciting.
Yeah, it is. And we should be, I look at this men's prayer meeting, and here we are. I mean, the average guy what's the median age? 70 something, and very few of them can hear, and but God's moving intimately on these guys. It's really sweet.
It seems like we're all going through the same thing together as far as growth and maturity, and we're going through different crises,
yes.
Tumultuous times, but we all have the same story. Isn't that amazing?
Yes, sir.
There's a scene that binds us together. I'm excited to be here every Wednesday for this prayer meeting.
He's preparing us as a unit.
Yeah, I can see it. We got so much to talk about. Would you come back?
I will.
Oh, I know. This is a blast.
Can I?
Yes.
Thank you. I know we ate up a lot of tape. Or do they use tape anymore? A lot of digits.
It's on that thing over there. I don't know.
Thank you.
Thanks for showing up.
Oh, it's been a joy.
What a blast.
I really appreciate it.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. Well, we're going to continue this next week, I do believe. Well,
or sometime soon.
Sometime soon. We've been planning this for years, and things come up all the time. But we're going to continue on with this Conversations on the Porch. Thanks for watching.